Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction House taking a look at some of the guns that are coming up for sale in their June of 2015 regional auction. I found one pistol here that's something I've been wanting to take a look at for a long time, and it turns out this one's a little more interesting than I was anticipating. This is a model of 1913 Campo-Giro. It was a Spanish military pistol. So a lot of people may not realize that Spain was actually the third country in the world to adopt a semi-auto, self-loading service pistol to replace all of its old revolvers. The first two were Belgium and Switzerland, but it was only 1903 when Spain adopted the Bergmann-Mars, so very early. This was in 9mm Largo, or 9x23mm. It was a fairly potent cartridge for the time. It was a pretty good gun. The problem was, they didn't order that many. They only ordered 3,000, and Bergmann had trouble filling the order. He was really trying to get a larger order in place and on paper in order to make it cost-effective to tool up to make these guns in large number. And ultimately, he didn't end up delivering these 3,000 Bergmann pistols to Spain until 1910. So it took 7 years between when they adopted the gun and when they actually got all of them in hand. Well, during that time, people started getting restless. They kind of wanted a domestically produced pistol anyway. And what they ended up with was the Campo-Giro. So as early as 1900, there was a Spanish gentleman who had started working on his own pistol. He got a patent for it in 1904. He had it tested by the Spanish military in 1909, and it was ultimately adopted by the Spanish military in 1912. His name was Venancio López de Caballos y Aguirre, and he was the Count of Campo-Giro, and that's the name that got onto the pistol, was Campo-Giro. So the Spanish military formally adopted the pistol in 1912, and production began in 1913. Now the state arsenal at Oviedo couldn't handle the production capacity for it or the tooling. It's not entirely clear why, but instead of being produced there, the contract went to a company called Esperanza y Unceta, which would become the Astra company later on. Now, Astra made about 960 of these pistols for the Army, and a handful more for commercial sale. And then 1914 rolled around, and, well, that was World War I. Spain wasn't officially involved in World War I, but the Astra company started getting, or Esperanza y Unceta, got massive orders for pistols for the French Army. So they stopped producing Campo-Giros because they were overwhelmed with commercial production, or military production for France, for sale. And hey, that was a lot more money and a lot more guns than this little Spanish order. So it wasn't until 1916 that they came back and actually started working on the Campo-Giro again. And by that time, Venancio López had made some modifications to the design. And what the Spanish ended up buying in large numbers for the military was actually the model 1913/16 with those modifications. The most obvious one is they moved the magazine release from under the trigger guard to actually being basically a heel type release on the bottom of the grip. So ultimately, the Spanish military purchased 13,157 Campo-Giro pistols of the 1913/16 variety. They were in use really only for a few years. It was a particularly complex pistol to use. Frankly, it doesn't feel all that good in the hand. And the Spanish military started looking for a replacement. Ultimately, they adopted the Astra Model 400 in 1920, and it went into production in 1921. That would hold the Spanish military for many years. Venancio López didn't even live to see that happen. He actually died in a horseback riding accident in 1916. So this pistol and its development trail is really the only firearms design we have from the man. I should point out this was also in 9mm Largo. It's a plain blowback pistol. And I'll tell you what, it is a kind of a nightmare of a pistol to disassemble. This is kind of the first pistol I've really run into that truly requires 3 hands to disassemble. So, if you're up for it, bring the camera back here and I'll show you how to actually take this thing apart. Before we actually get into disassembly, let's take a quick look at a few of the features here. As I mentioned, this is straight blowback. It is single action. We have our hammer back here. This is the magazine release on the model of 1913. Push that in, and it pops the magazine out. On the later guns, they move the magazine release to a lever down here. Now we do have a safety here, and it's a bit of an unusual safety in that it can only be engaged when the hammer is at half cock. And then it prevents the hammer from being pulled any farther, obviously prevents the trigger. So kind of just a redundant safety. and the safety operates backwards. So to move to the fire position, you have to pull the safety backwards, then you finish cocking the hammer, and then if you have a round in the chamber, you can fire. It does have an automatic hold open when the magazine's empty, which is a good thing too for disassembly, which you'll see in a minute. It does not have any sort of slide release. In order to drop the slide, what we do is hold on to this, pop the magazine, and then the slide immediately drops forward. So, without further ado, let us move on to disassembly. First thing we're going to do, obviously it's unloaded, but we actually lock the slide open as the initial step of disassembly. And then I have a cross pin here that I need to push out, but it is locked in place by the firing pin. So I actually have to push the firing pin in and then push this cross pin out. This is the first step of several that actually kind of requires 3 hands. So I'm going to hold that in there. Fortunately, this is a very nice loose fitting piece. There we go. All right, the next step here is I actually have to hold the slide about 1/16 of an inch farther back, and then I can rotate the bolt 90 degrees counterclockwise, which will allow it to come out. So you can see I can pull the slide back just a little bit more, and now I can rotate the bolt inside the slide. Now, when the slide goes forward, the slide will come off the front and the bolt will come out the back. And it will do that as soon as I release the magazine. So for this next step, I need to hold on to the slide, hit the magazine release while holding the pistol, and you kind of want to make sure that something's behind the bolt in case it gets a bit of a spring jolt. So we're going to do that. Then there we go. Now the slide comes off of this exceedingly long recoil spring. So there's our spring. Here we have our frame, the tubular slide. This would, of course, be the direct inspiration for the Astra 400 series of tubular slide guns. So I'm going to start with the bolt here. It has a pair of locking lugs around the side that lock it into the slide. It doesn't move. Once the gun's assembled, this bolt stays in position, but it's removable for field stripping. Now we have a spring-loaded firing pin. You can see through that slot how the firing pin holds that latch in place. If I push the firing pin forward, I can pop the extractor out. Pretty simple basic extractor. Then the firing pin comes out along with its spring. This is kind of I suspect this is a fairly fragile piece. The big cutout for that latch or block and a small diameter face on the firing pin, I suspect these are relatively easy to break. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this right now. Put the firing pin back in. I just drop the back of the extractor into that hole, and we're good. Next up, let's look at the frame. I can actually pull the barrel out. And we have a barrel, a little tiny spring, and this component. This is actually a sliding recoil buffer. This spring sits in the buffer, barely, and in this hole in the front of the barrel, if I can get it to sit in there. So this sits like so, and it just has a little bit of play to stop that last bit of travel of the slide rather than slamming onto some other component. And we have our 2 lugs down here that lock the barrel into the frame right there. Hammer's back there. The trigger assembly is actually a removable unit, which I'm not going to pull out because frankly that's getting a little bit beyond field stripping and I don't want to have springs fly out and be embarrassing here. So reassembly is going to be the whole thing in reverse. I have to put this block By the way, this block sits here in the frame so it's able to travel back and forth. And I want to put the barrel in, but I need to make sure that that spring is in the recoil buffer, and then it gets a little bit of tension on it when the barrel sits in the recoil lugs. After that, our recoil spring goes on. Then, now the slide on our recoil spring, and then let's get the rails lined up. Now we've got the slide. All right, we're going to reassemble this in the reverse of how we disassembled it, but it's important to point out that you cannot pull the slide all the way back and then push the bolt in, because it will hit on this block. Instead, what you have to do, you can see there's a little oval cutout right here to clear that block. You have to actually hold the bolt here and then pull the slide back around it in order for it to fit, because you cannot push the bolt in past that block. So slide sits here, and you have to put, you can see there's a second little rounded cutout there. That's for the top of the hammer, so that you don't have to put too much spring tension on that. Now, the saving grace of this whole process is that the slide locks open on the magazine by itself. So, put our bolt in position here. This has a very strong recoil spring. And again, you kind of need 3 hands to do this effectively. There we go. All right, I now have it locked open on the magazine. The bolt is still not fully engaged, so I'm going to pull this slide back about 1/16 of an inch. Now I can rotate the bolt back upright. Now we can see our slot here. So the next thing to do is I can actually pop the magazine and drop the slide into its final position. Then this block has to go back in. So we'll drop it in there. It's easier to put back in than it is to take out. I once again push the firing pin forward to clear it. Let's try that again. So the block goes in, and there we go. Whew, one reassembled Campo-Giro. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I was expecting a 1913/16 when I saw this was on the list, and was very happily surprised to discover it was this earlier and much rarer 1913 pattern gun. So if you'd like to add it to your collection, it is coming up for auction here at Rock Island. If you take a look in the link below, that will take you to Rock Island's catalog page. You can check out their pictures and their description, such as it is, and place a bid online. Do your best to win it. Hopefully it'll go to a good home. Thanks for watching.